So good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking about the prisoner of war camp in Devizes, and particularly about the diary that we've got in our collection. But before I start, just a word or two about the museum. So we are an independent charity. You probably all know of us in Long Street, and a variety of sources of income, which is all a bit interesting at the moment. We're quite busy. We generally do lots of things like conferences and lectures, and we have an education officer who goes out to schools and so on. So we do lots of stuff. Now, the prison war camp in Devizes is really quite interesting, because what happened during the Second World War is the big news was that we had, shouldn't have done that, we had a major contingent of American soldiers here in Devizes who built and there was an army base on the outskirts of town. This is an aerial view of the camp at Devizes. Now, just to sort of situate it, the fork you can see in the road just there, that's the road off to Bishop's Canning. That's the London road heading off towards Avebury. So what's now the Hopton Industrial Estate, and also where Lidl is, and the various housing, the housing up towards Bishop's Canning, all of that was the American Air Force, the American Army base. What happened was, after D-Day, the section this side, what's now the Hopton Industrial Estate, was converted into a hospital. The other side of the road, where Lidl is, and the industrial estate there, and the council depot, was converted into the prison of war camp. And we've got an amazing aerial photo taken in '44 in April, showing the American Air Force Base, and you've got guys here playing baseball. Now, the reason, sort of something that really is fascinating, is that we were told in 2010 that there was a diary of a prisoner of war. And we sent a couple of photographs by a dealer. And the dealer knew nothing about the diary itself. It came from a house clearance in Westminster, and we mounted a fundraising campaign to purchase it, and grateful to many of those who donated towards that. Now, the diary itself, it's not really a diary, but it's beautifully illustrated, and it's 56 pages with wonderful illustrations and rhyming couplets. And as you can see, the writing is absolutely gorgeous. So whoever did this spent an awful long time both doing the drawings, doing the poetry, and then writing it out to make it look absolutely fantastic. Now, we didn't know who had written it. There's no name on it. The dealer said that there had been a photo inside it. Whether that was relevant or not was lost, but there are some clues. So the dialect, sort of the German, is very much a North German, is very much Northern German. We know, he says that his home is 2 hours away by plane. The initials may be HG. You can see here there's a picture of the chap doing his chores, and on the broom you can see HGPOW. From another bit, we know his POW number is 39592. And of course, you wonder, if this was in a house in Westminster, then how did it get there? Did he stay in England? Or did he go back? Did he give it to someone else, the diary to someone else? We didn't know. Now, what we can work out is that it was when it was written-ish. So the camp was set up in September '44. And in the diary, in the book, it says that the camp has British guards. Now, the Polish guards took over in December '44 because there was actually an escape attempt. Most of the men in the prison of war camp were what were called white Germans. There was a very, what the British did was to interrogate German prisoners of war and work out which were the black Germans. Those were the ones that were dangerous, that were indoctrinated, that were potentially in the SS and so on. They were shipped off up north, ideally to Scotland or Orkney. And the ones that remaining were those that doing their duty, and were not hardline Nazis. Now, there was a breakout in 44, and two hardliners attempted to get to RAF Yatesbury, where the plan was for them to steal an aircraft. They got as far as a pigsty in Bishop's Canning. So clearly the diary was written before that happened, because then Polish Guards took over. And bearing in mind what happened in Poland during the Second World War, I think you can probably guess that the Polish Guards were slightly less sympathetic than the British. It also mentions roast goose, which is a pointer towards St. Martin's Day on the 11th of November. And it talks about the feast day for St. Nicholas's assistant. I'm not going to try and pronounce that, which is on the 5th of December. So it gives us quite a narrow window when this was done. Now, in terms of the prisoner of war camp, what we know from an account by the Women's Voluntary Service at the time, now the Royal Voluntary Service, is that the prisoners, a convoy of prisoners, arrived in September. There were 3 train loads. And notice how the WVS fed the guards with hot drinks, etc. No mention of the prisoners. And there are people who remember seeing the prisoners being marched and remember the smell and the fact they were infected with lice. And they were in a terrible state. So when they got to the camp, one of the first things to do was to clean them up and get them respectable again. Now, turning to the diary, when you look at what's in it, it really is an illustration of, it's not a diary as such, it is a day in the life of. And you can see at the top there, that's saying prisoner of war camp, and it gives the number 23/A1 in Devizes, England. And then in this beautifully written German, you've got talking about the day in the life. And you can see here a view of the camp. And he talks about getting woken up in the morning with the bugler, presumably sort of 6:30 or something. So they were operating as British camps did under military discipline. This is the bucket used by men, so they didn't have to get quite as far as the latrine. Must have been a great job in the morning emptying that. And again, getting caught short seems to be quite something this chap was really well aware of. But turning to lighter things, one of the things that this talks about, and this is where the British Guard comes in, is that they were swapping the things they had for luxuries, things like watches and rings and pens. So they're swapping them for cigarettes. Which, of course, cigarettes and sweets, those were the currency just as much as in British prisoner of war camps in Germany. And you see at the bottom how many cigarettes. So again, that's telling you that the chap who wrote this had quite a good command of English. And then on to other matters. I wondered what on earth these things were until, again, talking to someone and seeing the translation. These are meal tickets. These were issued to the prisoners, and in exchange for one of these, they would get a meal. So it's a way of making sure nobody got 2 breakfasts or whatever. Also, there was clearly a good trade in them to see who would get what food. And here's a wonderful picture of the camp cook, and you can see the chap there. You can almost see the words "more." And during the day, they were operating under military discipline and with under their own commanders. And of course, one of the jobs was to clean up, make everything fit, ready for inspection. And then there wasn't much to do, of course. And they were here in November with the glorious English weather. You can see them chucking it down with rain outside one of the big hangars. These would have been used these were used when the Americans were in the camp. These were used to store material and also to put tanks in, because there was a tank regiment here. Sitting on bunk beds, reading, and then starting to look at more exciting things and looking ahead to the things that were fun. So you can see here barbed wire, but also candles and furs, the fir tree. This is thinking, this is the celebration of Next Ruprecht, which is St. Martin's assistant, essentially Father Chrysilis's assistant. So this is starting to look ahead to the good times of Christmas. I love this illustration. So in this section, he is remembering, thinking about his family. And of course, he's safe in a prison of war camp in England. He has no idea what's happening to his family back home. He's thinking here of his wife and how he can go back home. But of course, he will have no idea what's happening back in Germany. He'll know that the war, in the general terms, what's happening with the war. He'll know about bombing of civilians, civilian towns, and he'll be very worried about his family. And this is the bit where he talks about how he is 2 hours from home. You can see him here behind the barbed wire, looking out of what looks to be a very North German house. I wonder whether that's North Germany, or whether the hills, the blue hills beyond, look surprisingly like the downs above Devizes. But here he is thinking about his family, and up at the top you can see planes heading over towards Germany. Presumably those are bombers. So again, bring very much to mind what's happening to his family. And again, he's thinking of the good times, sausages, cake and champagne, thinking about celebrating Christmas. But of course, that's not where he is. This is where he is, and he's starting to think about nighttime. There's his bunk bed, boots alongside, hearing the snoring of everyone else in his dormitory. And at the bottom, you can see the frozen gutters. So he'll be thinking about how cold it is. And then he signs off and saying how much he's looking forward to going home. And the beginning and in the morning, yet another day. We lock down for them just as it is for us at the moment. And in barbed wire, that Camp 23A1. So he knows where he is. So that's the diary. It's absolutely amazing, real insight into life in the camp. And we tried to find out who may have created the book, and we chased down. We had a German-speaking volunteer who tried everything. So he put appeals out online. He tried contacting the Red Cross. We tried to see if there was any reference to prisoner of war numbers. And absolutely no idea whatsoever. Then 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years later, we had an email out of the blue from a chap called Frank Safran. And as you can read there, he said, as soon as he saw these online, because his grandfather, Herman Gensler, had been in Devizes. He was trying to search to find out about the prison war camp in Devizes, and immediately reckoned the sketches. And he knew that this diary was the work of Herman Gensler and his close friend and campmate, Herman Hildenstein from Coburg in Bavaria. And as he said, they became like soulmates, and they helped each other during the hard times in the camp to keep their spirits up. Remember, the Polish guards and the deprivation of the civilians in Devizes, the prisoners of war would not have been in fantastically comfortable conditions. So Frank, we talked to Frank, and he sent through a couple of photos. So this is Herman Gensler, you see there on the right, and to the left, Herman Hildenstein. These are the two who created the diary. And it's Herman Gensler who was the artist. You can see here his photo of him in uniform, and you can see his self-portrait, and you see the HG on the brush. So it really does tie up. And Frank was able to tell us about what happened to Herman and his story. So he had wanted to go to art school, but his father had insisted he became a civil servant. He married in 1935. Remember the wonderful drawing of his wife and him thinking about his family at home. In 1939, he was drafted into the Naval Artillery and forced to join the Nazi Party. He did his bit behind the scenes to help Jewish families escape, and he was eventually captured by Canadian troops in the Netherlands in November 44. So it didn't take long for him to be shipped back to Britain and into the camp. He was released in February 46, and he served 3 years in a denazification program before being re-employed as a civil servant. He had 2 daughters and died in 1984, aged 87. And just turning back to the camp, as I said, it is under the area between Liddell and along the Bishop's Canning Road. But when you take a close-up look of the aerial photos, you can see here in that sort of oblong block, you see these are the sheds, the store sheds. And of course, what is left there today is those store sheds. That's now council depot. I think there's either 6 or 8 of those sheds are still left, which is amazing. And you've got his amazing drawings of the camp, chucking it down with rain, of course, but occasionally a nice sunny, occasional sunshine to make him feel better. That's it for my talk. I hope you found that interesting. It's wonderful to be able to share that diary with you, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions if you've got any. So over to you. I've unmuted everybody, I think. So if you want to ask anything, fire away.
So in that picture that you've just shown of the entire campsite, which bit was the actual accommodation, or were they in the same area as the storage?
They were mostly in that area where those sort of Nissen hut-like the sheds were. But you will see from his drawing of tents, some of them were in tents as well. So we don't have any aerial photographs. We don't have any more detailed record of the camp than what you've seen, because although there are plans of the camp as it was built, when it was converted to the POW camp, it was something that nobody was interested in. And then when the prisoners of war moved out, the rest of it was just dismantled very quickly without anyone. It was something no one was interested in. So we've no idea. Interesting, when somebody did a metal detector, went over what is now Liddell with a metal detector and found some of the little tokens, the meal tokens. So it must have gone at least that far, but we don't really know.
What happened to the prisoners at the end of the war? Were some of them repatriated just back to West Germany, or were some of them taken to East Germany and left in the Russian sector?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm 99% sure they were taken back to West Germany. Of course, the hard border, was something that came in over time. It wasn't there to start with, but of course there was the Russian sector and the British sector and so on. But of course, quite a number of POWs stayed behind. After the war after VE Day, many of the German POWs went and worked on farms as well. So they sort of met lots of local people. And I know several POWs, and in fact there was a Polish guard that sort of stayed on and was living here in Devizes until he passed away in 2012.
There was a denazification program at the end of the war, and many of the prisoners had to stay on to have lectures, etc., to bring them back into sort of normal, denazify them. I
think that was done in Germany.
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of a standard program. And I think it was sort of essentially night school, turning up once a week or something. It wasn't not as though they were put in prison for 3 years or anything like that. There were just too many. But I think it was a light touch program just to make sure that there was not going to be any trouble from people. But clearly, the people in the Devizes camp were, especially after December 44 and that breakout, were very clearly those that were told what to do, rather than leaders or hardline Nazis.
I was very struck, David. I've not actually seen it before, but very struck by the illustrations, because they really do bring the whole episode to life, don't they?
They're absolutely fantastic, aren't they?
The cross-hatching on the for the rain, and the very neat bunk beds. I just wondered, was he sanitising it? Was it really that neat and orderly?
It would have been, because they were under military discipline.
Yes, yeah.
It's not as though it wasn't a refugee camp. They were under military discipline, and that was regarded as very important. Because for morale, if nothing else, it's just like, as I say, in the British prisoner of war camps in Germany, they operated in the same way, because it was important that the men, by having routines, if there was nothing to do, so they had to have something to do. So sort of the routines of life and inspections and so on kept everyone busy and occupied. That's really, they knew that was really important.
It was interesting also the meal tokens, because at first I thought one had a beaker pot on it. It's strange, and another one had a sort of labyrinth spiral, didn't it?
Yeah, I've no idea what those signs related to, and I'm hoping that at some point someone might give us one of those tokens, because they're one of the few things that will be left of the prisoners of war.
Yeah.
I tried to build into, it's of course just outside the compound, the council compound, is what's now a housing estate, the Ley Wood estate, and there was a Roman villa there. So for those of you who are the society members, you'll be getting, or you've already got, your magazine for this year, which has got an account of the excavations of the villa. But I tried to get written into the project brief for the archaeological work of that housing estate, the ability to run a community project, particularly to run some metal detector surveys, because it's very clear that there was a rubble spread where they'd sort of demolished bits of the camp and scattered it over the field. So we could have picked up some more of those. Unfortunately, that didn't quite happen, for reasons I won't bore you with. So we lost that opportunity to see what there was, what evidence there was of life in the prisoner of war camp, and the Americans as well, for that matter. Very disappointing.
But I wonder what people turn up in their gardens.
It'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, thank you very much. I'm giving another talk on, where are we, Tuesday afternoon, 2:30. This one will be about the Laycock Cup. Okay. So hope some of you might join me then.
Lovely.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.